Evie is an associate professor of teaching and the head of undergraduate provisions at UCL-IOE. She has more than 20 years experience in providing intervention programs to children with special education needs and disabilities. She also worked with various local authorities, charities, organizations, and schools across the UK to provide training for parents and teaching staff. Evie is a graduate member of the British Psychological Society and is teaching developmental psychology and special education to undergraduate and postgraduate students and teacher trainees. She is also a governor in 2 schools in the UK and promotes inclusion at all levels of education. Today, Evie will deliver a talk on the topic, Schools and Teachers Working in Collaboration with Parents. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Evie. Okay?
Thank you very much. Nice to see you, everyone. Oh, bless you. Thank you. It sounds more impressive than it is, I think. So thank you very much. And it's lovely for me to be here today to talk to you about working with parents, because very often we think about how we support teachers and how we support the children of special educational needs. But what we seem to miss sometimes is what the parents are going through. So we are going to look at the parents' role and how we can support them as educators. So according to the UK government, there are some parental programs that are delivered and offered to parents. And if we think about children and young people being the center of our attention, what is involved is assessment and tracking and interventions. What is involved is the provision and developing, the outcomes for these children. But what is also very important is the conversation with parents. When we are diagnosing children either with autism or with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or visual impairments or any other difficulties, we always talk to the parents and have a conversation with them, and we are asking them, has the child developed properly? Did they have a natural birth? How has the child been up to date? And the reason that we talk to parents is because we want to establish whether the child has a difficulty that is developmental, like dyslexia, autism, etc., or whether there is something else going on. Because what's important to remember is that some of the difficulties we explore as educators have very similar symptoms. So you may have a child who is autistic, but and that's why they can't pay attention, they don't have good eye contact, they don't follow instructions. But similarly, a child who is abused at home or is neglected may also show these behaviors. So the parent's voice is very important when we are doing a diagnosis, but also when we are designing interventions and supporting the children. And very often the schools have a very difficult role of establishing what is happening at home and how they can help the child, etc. So with this in mind, it's important to understand how the parents understand the difficulties. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the stages that parents go through after a diagnosis of a special educational need and disability in their child. You will probably identify that these stages are also applicable to those people who may get a diagnosis of cancer or Alzheimer's or any other difficulty. So these stages are in the human nature. We go through these stages when we get a diagnosis of something, and the parents of SEND children sense that a bit more. So at the very beginning, the parents, when they hear the word autism, let's say your child has autism, when the parents hear that, then they get very shocked and they are devastated and they are very afraid and confused because they do not understand what that means. And they are, of course, feeling disappointed. And in some cultures, and I believe in China, this is an emotion, parents may feel guilty. They may feel that they did something wrong, and that's why their child has this difficulty. So they may be angry, they may be disappointed, they are going through a crisis management stage. So as educators, especially if you're working in the early years with pre-primary school children, this is the time when most of these special educational needs and disabilities will be diagnosed. So you will have parents who are going through this crisis stage of being scared and panicked and overwhelmed and afraid. So how can we support them? What can we advise them in order to cope? So sometimes just using very simple phrases such as don't be afraid to ask for help, or do read books or leaflets or search on the internet about the difficulty is very simple and strong advice at the same time. We need to tell the parents to be open with people. Very often we see parents who are ashamed to share that their child has a diagnosis because they are afraid that the society is going to blame them, that they've done something wrong. So they need to understand that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to allow some space for themselves and their child to process the information. And they should have confidence, because the truth is that parents know their children best. We as educators maybe see the children at school for like 6-7 hours a day, but then the parents have them during the difficult times, in the evenings, in the early mornings, in the weekends. They see their children in different environments and with different people. So they are the ones who know their children better, and they should have confidence that they know their children better and share their knowledge. After that first stage of crisis, they go through the shakedown stage. So this is when they start feeling that they have some basic information and they have started asking for some help and support. That means that they are able to regain a little bit of the control over the difficulty, over the situation, and the child's abilities. So we need to meet these parents, and we need to encourage them to get in touch with parents who have children with the same need or similar need. Because as you know, when you go through a difficulty, let's say you are anxious or you have dyslexia, or you are going through breakup of a relationship, or you're going through the death of a grandparent, if you talk to people who have gone through similar situations, you feel more supported, you feel that you are not alone, you feel that there are things, that there are other people who understand these emotions. So at this stage is when we need to encourage parents to meet parents of other children who have a similar difficulty, and to understand that it's not their fault that their child has this difficulty, but it's important to keep in touch with the teachers and the school and the everyday world and the family. So not to hide themselves and their children. Then we go through the third stage, which is the cycles of feelings. And that's when we have a lot of confusion in terms of how we feel about the difficulty. And as I said, These are the feelings that a parent of a special educational needs child feels when they get the diagnosis, but they are feelings that, for example, someone who has had a diagnosis of cancer or a terminal illness may have, because the difficulty is to understand that most of the special educational needs and disabilities won't go away. So it's not as easy as a headache that we take a tablet or a medication and then it goes away. This is there to stay. So we need to deal and cope with this, diagnosis. So the parents in this stage will feel very pessimistic. They may be depressed. They may be desperate to find a solution. They may be very frustrated. So they are finding it very difficult to cope with their feelings. And what we need to do as educators is to encourage them to understand that the feelings of frustration and anxiety and depression will pass. So it's okay to feel like that. It won't rule the parent's life. It will just go through this process and then they will be able to find a way to cope. So finally, after all these stages of crisis and fear and strong emotions and not knowing what to do and desperation, we reach the final stage, which is very important because it's where we start turning the negative into positive. So the negative label of a diagnosis of a special educational need is turning into something positive. How can we move on? What can we do to support our child? The parents at that stage know a little bit more about the disability or the difficulty, and they are not afraid of it anymore. And similarly, as I said, someone who had a diagnosis of cancer will start thinking, okay, I'm not afraid of it anymore. Now I understand what it is. I understand how it is affecting me. How can I be more energetic? How can I be more confident to start coping with this difficulty? So once the parents and the students and the teachers and everyone involved with the child understand the problems, then they will be able to support the parents to talk to other family members and friends and schools and even strangers in order to be able to shake off the shame and be able to find easier ways to support their children. So parents themselves need support. Parents themselves need support to understand the condition and understand what they need to do to support their child so that their child can blossom and shine in the future. So saying that, when the parents have a diagnosis of a child with special educational needs and disabilities, unfortunately, this brings quite a few challenges to the family. And the most important challenge that they are telling us is financial. So unfortunately, because the parents need to pay loads of money to find treatment for their children and support and therapists and carers, there is a financial hardship for the family. So it's a financial issue, and this may strain emotional relationships. And that's why sometimes we see that parents have fights between themselves, or if there are grandparents or other family members in the family, in the immediate family or living together, then we see that there are emotional outbursts and issues. Then we have a restriction in the social life. It's not easy to go to a restaurant with an autistic child who is making noise to sit and have a quiet meal. It may not be easy for a child who is losing mobility in their legs to go on a wheelchair and be taken to different places because there may be issues with going with the wheelchair in the car, up and down the pavement, in a building, up the stairs, and all these issues. So the social life of the family can be restricted. There are higher stress levels as well. So the parents and the students may get quite stressed in understanding how the condition affects the child and what they can do. And this will affect very often the modifications needed to the family's activities and goals. You know, very often, and in some religions and cultures more than others, we have parents who think, I want my child to grow up to become a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a professor. And then when they understand that this cannot happen because their child has a difficulty or a diagnosis of special educational needs, then this is making them feel really uncomfortable. They need to change all their goals. There are time restrictions which are caused by care demands. It's easier to have a typically developing child get ready in the morning quickly, have breakfast taken to school, than an autistic child or a child with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or a blind child, or a child who has difficulties with focus and managing their time. So this is having a strain on the parents' need to care for their children. Sleep deprivation is something that very often parents are talking to us about, because unfortunately the difficulties come with quite a few sleep problems. And very often parents have said that they are tired because their children aren't sleeping through the night, and then they can't sleep through the night. And then all this caring is taking a toll on them. And even if they have to go to work without being rested and having a good sleep, is much more tiring. They have sometimes to perform unpleasant procedures. Sometimes we have children with very profound and severe learning difficulties that are not able to feed themselves, and they need to be fed through a tube. We may have children that are not toilet trained, and they need to be cleaned after every incident, even as further up, it's okay to change a 5-month-old baby's nappy, but when you have a 15-year-old who is not toilet trained, that becomes too much for the parents. There is also a lack of babysitters and a lack of support, carers, especially in the UK, because many babysitters and many carers don't want to have this big responsibility of a very needy child. So it's much more difficult for the parents to find someone they can trust to take care of their child when they are at work or when they want to go on a social outing. And in general, we hear that there are challenges in day-to-day life. So imagine, for example, an autistic child who only eats yellow food, or doesn't want the food to touch each other, or who doesn't want to go to different places because they have restricted knowledge of pathways, and they want to stick to that. So loads of challenges for the family that come with the diagnosis of a special educational need and disability. So if we were to look at the impacts these have to the families, we know that parents of children with special educational needs are very vulnerable to stress. And what we have seen from research is that 70% of mothers and 40% of fathers of children with SEND are going to have stress issues. We know that going through a diagnosis and go through planning processes are very stressful for the parents. And in the UK, unfortunately, even though we are quite ahead with research and everything, unfortunately, it still takes a lot of time to get a diagnosis in public sector. If you go and pay a private professional, it's faster to get a diagnosis. But when you go through the public sector, when you go through the system, it may take up to a year to 2 years to get a diagnosis. So imagine all these parents and early years teachers in early schools that they see a child is struggling or has behavioral issues and they can't learn and they can't cope, and it may take up to 2 years to get a diagnosis and the help these children need. So behavior is something that is very problematic and difficult for parents because, you know, depending on how their child's behave, they are stressed more and more. So what is needed, obviously, is not only personal support and emotional support for the parent, but also material support in the terms of resources for the schools and adult support that is needed. So when we did some research and we asked parents, how does this impact you? Then the parents told us, and these are some quotes from parents, I used to get really depressed. I used to find it really hard trying to communicate with him. I couldn't understand why we were like we were. So a parent saying that they were finding it really difficult to communicate with their autistic child and they were really depressed. Some of the siblings, the brothers and sisters, were saying he used to get very frustrated. This is referring to the autistic sibling. If he couldn't find the right words to ask her to move, he'd just get hold of her hair and drag her across the room. I didn't want her to do it to succeed in swimming assessment. I was dreading it in a way. It sounds awful because obviously I want her to do well, but I just didn't want his confidence to be knocked either. So the siblings are saying that they are sometimes jealous of the special educational need child because they are having more attention. And if they do well, the siblings feel uncomfortable why they did better than me and I am typically developing normal and they aren't. So it creates quite a lot of confidence issues. And then some more quotes from parents which show us that they are always afraid for the future because, to be honest, some of you, if you are parents, you may feel that way. Parents usually feel that what they want to do is they want to protect their children. They want to be there to support them, very often to go to university, get a job, and then they feel that they've done their part. But for the special educational needs and disabilities parents, the parents are always afraid, what will happen if I die? What will happen to my child if I'm not around to support them anymore? And this is a fear for the future because they don't have this peace of mind that, oh, my child will go to university, will become, you know, will get a job, and then they will be supporting themselves, and then they will have a family. This is not how it's going to work for SEND children. So how can we get the parents not to be afraid? So some parents said, you know, like, we know that after this September, we will have to start fighting in order to secure a place in a secondary school. If she could just learn to read and write, you know, they are asking for very simple skills, just reading and writing. I hope that he won't need extra help because I think it is more difficult for them when they are in the big school. I'm hoping he will be all right by the time he gets to the big school. And you know, the big school for some children may be the primary school when they are 3, 4 years old. When they are 10, 11, it may be the secondary school, and so on. And this creates a worry for the parents. And other parents said, I know he probably won't ever be able to catch up to their level, but you know, at least if he can keep going and the school has faith in him and don't hold him back again, that's the only thing they are worried about, because very often schools may make a decision to keep children back, especially if they have special educational needs. So the children are missing this contact with children with the same age and same year, and they are a bit more behind. So some researchers have argued that there are positive things in having a child with special educational needs. So it's not all negative. Yes, these children have their difficulties, and they are there is this whole impact in the family, but there are some positive things coming from a diagnosis. And families describe the positive impact that children have on their lives. They are saying that children with special educational needs and disabilities are very often joyful and happy, because very often they don't understand the difficulties in life, and they are not as much affected by what's happening. There is an increased sense of purpose and priorities. So, for some people, a priority or a purpose may be to dress nicely and have brand bags and look really posh and nice and have expensive clothes. But for the parent of an autistic child, to just be able to sit with their child, to eat together, even if they become messy, is a priority and is more important than other things. So they have a more increased sense of purpose, and they put things into perspective. What is important is not all the materialistic things. It's just to have a family. It's just to be there for each other and to share love and kindness and support for those that need it. There are expanded personal and social networks, because, as we said earlier, it's very important to start talking to to other parents of children who have a similar difficulty. So that means that you start having more friends and more contacts and more acquaintances, and you have more people to turn to who understand you. And this is a very positive impact of having a difficulty. Parents have also reported an increased spirituality. We see that parents of special educational needs and disabilities children may turn to religion or to their spiritual feelings to try and cope with the difficulty. And regardless of the area religion, I think you will agree that the most important thing all religions are trying to share and spread is love for each other and kindness to each other, which is very important in living together in a united way. Then the family becomes more close and more unified. So because, let's say, the grandparents are trying to help, and then the parents need to talk to each other to communicate who is going to be with the child, who is going to take them here, there, who is going to support. So this creates this closeness that they have a common purpose, a common aim to work together in order to support the child. There is an increased tolerance and understanding. Very often people get frustrated if, for example, they go to the restaurant and there are children to the table next to them and make noise, or if they live in a neighborhood where the next door children make noise and don't let them have peace and quiet. But when you have a child with special educational needs, because this is happening very often, you become more tolerant and you understand better, and you start feeling, like there are other parents out there that go through the same like me. So you become a bit more understanding. There's also personal growth and strength and positive impacts on others in the community. What we have seen in the UK, and I'm pretty sure you probably have seen that in China as well. Usually the parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities may start charities, organizations, support groups, So they put their emphasis and effort in trying to improve the life of their child, but also for the other children with a similar diagnosis. So there is a very positive impact in the community after a diagnosis. Now, in the UK, the legislation says that the parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities need to be involved in their child's education. And this is considered a right. So according to the law, the parents have a right to engage with their child's schools and with the local authorities and with the professionals, and they have a right to say what they think is best for their child and what isn't. So it's a very necessary component in order to design the provision for the children. And I'm not sure what's the case in China. It may be interesting for you to explore. In terms of the Chinese law, do parents have a right to their children's education or not? So what we have seen from research is that when the parents get involved, this leads to higher academic achievement. So when the parents and the teachers or the schools work together, we see that the children achieve better academically than if the parents aren't involved. And this probably is true for everyone. Like if you grow up in a household that your parents value education and always support you to do better and to go to university or to study or to follow a career and become better, the more your parents value that, the more you grow up to value it as well. So what we see is that when the parents get involved with the children of special educational needs and disabilities education, these children do better. We also see more positive attitudes for parents and children in the school settings. And then we see that there is improved parent satisfactions with teachers. So if the parents engage with the teachers and the teachers guide them and tell them, this is what you need to do, this is how we're going to support the child, this is how the child was today and their experiences, then the parents feel more satisfied and they like the teachers more because they are working together for the same purpose, to help this child. So since 1932, which is like previous century, almost 100 years ago, Waller was saying that the fact seems to be that parents and teachers are natural enemies, predestined to discomfiture of the other. So it just seems that parents and teachers are always, on the opposite directions, because teachers very often feel parents don't understand them. Parents very often feel that teachers don't do enough for their children. So if we manage this collaboration, teachers and parents working together, this has the best impact for the children with special educational needs. What teachers have told us is that when they have worked with the parents, and this teacher said that they had a mobile phone which they had shared with parents, and they were having a 90 minutes block time. So during this time, any parent could reach the teacher. And they felt that it was nice because the parents were able to share how their child has been. They were able to share ideas of what works and what doesn't. And they were able to talk about homework and how the teacher and the parents could work together to support the child. So the teachers are saying that engaging with parents is useful. The parents are saying that engaging with teachers is useful too. So how could it work? Because the parents are involved in the identification and the assessment of the difficulty. So the parents have to be consulted in order for the child to go through an assessment and get diagnosis. They are also participating in the decision making, what's the educational provision that is going to be followed, and what is the efficacy of the child's education. So then, if we're saying that parents go through a lot of emotions, they go through all these stages to cope with their child's difficulty, then they understand that they can turn all this negative to something very positive. We know that parents say that working with the teachers is very useful. The teachers say that working with the parents is very useful. So can we move on then and include children with special educational needs into our mainstream settings? Can we include these children? So the parents of special educational needs children and the typically developing children usually show positive attitudes to the inclusion of children in mainstream schools. Saying that up to approximately 15, 20 years ago in China, most parents didn't want their children to be educated with SEND children. So parents of children who are typically developing, normal children, didn't want their children to be educated alongside SEND children. But now we see that even in China, there is a shift to this, and parents have started being more positive in the inclusion of children in mainstream settings. And what that means is that children start being accepted, they start fitting into the mainstream settings. We don't focus so much about being different, but on boosting the sense of belonging. Because parents believe that children with disabilities develop better social skills and academic abilities and motivation when they are alongside role models. So there are two sides of the coin. One is that when you are sending a child to a special needs school, they have probably people who are better trained, more professional, and less children in the classroom. They get more one-to-one time. They have their needs better met. However, we know that children with special educational needs and disabilities are very good at copying behaviors. So similarly, they may copy from each other. And because they don't have any role models, they may become worse in a special setting than if they were in a mainstream where they had role models. So it's a bit of a difficult decision. Where do we put the children? It's very interesting that when we ask parents of special educational needs children how they feel, we find that they value the social acceptance more than the academic achievement. So for children with special educational needs, it's doing well in maths and Chinese and writing and geography is not as important as it is to have friends or to be accepted socially. So the social aspect of education is more important for them than the academic. So when we talk to parents, we see that when the socialization is more important for them, then they choose these inclusive settings. They choose your learning classroom scheme. They are choosing for their children to be with typically developing children because it's very important for them, for their child to socialize. When we see that parents are very focused on academic goals, so academic achievement, then they prefer the special educational needs services because this gives them a bit of continuity. It's important to remember that there are different times in a child's life that parents will need to make some decisions. When the child is ready to go to school, the parents will need to decide which school the child will go to. And will it be a private school? Will it be a public school? Will it be the one around the corner from the house? Will it be the one that is further up? The school that has a better name, that is better for than others. So there are these big decisions. Then once the child goes to school, to the nursery, then they have to move to primary school. So they need to make another decision, which primary school. Then in secondary, it's which secondary, unless, of course, all the education is on the same place. So when the parents are concerned with the academic achievements of their children, what they are trying to do is, where can I just take my child that they can stay there and go through all the years of schooling? And we see that that's when they choose special schools. They choose them when they need this continuity of service, and they don't want to have to make a decision at every milestone. So one of my students who graduated last year did her dissertation with me, and we looked at what predicts parental attitudes towards inclusion in China. So she collected data from more than 200 parents in China, and she tried to identify what affects the parents' behavior. And the three factors that we found were those more significantly related to positive attitudes was the parental education level. So we found that those parents who were better educated were more positive towards inclusion of SEND children in schools. Also, the more exposure to inclusion. So the parents who knew about inclusion, who had heard about inclusion, who had friends who had SEND children and were included in the school, they held more positive attitudes. And this was actually the strongest of the three predictors. And also having an SEND child in the household significantly contributed to a more positive attitude. So what this is telling us is that educating the parents and raising the awareness about special educational needs and inclusion is making people, and generally parents, hold more positive attitudes towards inclusion. And if we start with the parents and we work on including the children with SEND in the schools, then everybody's going to hold more positive attitudes to inclusion, which will translate into the society, which will translate into jobs and workplaces later. So you are changing the whole attitude of the country and the ethos of how we include SEND children, not only in education, but all the different levels that come with it. So when we are looking at, as educators, when we are looking at a difficulty and when we are looking at inclusion, we need to consider the issues from all perspectives. So what are the issues for the parents if we were to include? The parents may not understand the services that are available to them. They may not have resources. They may, the parents of typically developing children, so what we would say in psychology, normal children, which are the children that follow the milestones as expected, then they hold more positive views about the inclusion than parents of non-inclusive schools. So if the school has an inclusive ethos, parents are more likely to be responsive and accepting. There may be concerns about the quality of support and the possibility of rejection of the child by peers, because obviously we all have met some people who will laugh at the person who is different, who will make jokes about them, who will not want to be their friend or engage with them. And that is a big fear for the parents. What if my child gets rejected from the other children? They may have to fight for the provision because, you know, like they have to fight for the necessary resources. And in the UK, very often they may need to take the local authorities to court to get what they need. We also see that middle-class parents are more successful at getting extra resources. So having the education to know who to ask for help for the child and to push for that is helpful, because then the children who, the SEND children of parents who are middle class are usually getting more support than those who come from working classes. And that's very often not only because of the financial stability of the parents, but also because the parents are better educated to demand from the school and the local authorities and the governments and the bodies more help for their children. Then we need to focus on the child and think, is the placement suitable? Is the school suitable for the child's needs? Are they able to have their needs met? Are they be able to grow some independent skills? Will they be affected? Then how are the children's behaviors going to affect the other children? And how can we support them not to be rejected from them and the teachers? And in general, the philosophy of the school and the attitudes of the teachers are very important. If teachers and school staff do not believe in inclusion, then they will not make it work. And this is going to be an issue. Finally, in terms of teacher education, something that's very problematic is the training that teachers have. And I'm not sure what's the case in China, but in the UK, teachers train and they don't have very much special educational needs training when they go to schools. So they don't have this extensive learning and understanding of SEND, but they are still expected to work with the children. And what's important to bear in mind is that, especially in the UK, because it's more multicultural as a country, we see that very often the teacher's ethnicity or the cultural background or the class or the religion may affect the teacher's attitudes towards inclusion. So parents and teachers don't necessarily agree on the benefits of inclusion, and research has shown that not all parents want their child included. So it's important to ensure that parents and teachers work together, not necessarily to include the child, but to identify what is the best outcome for that specific child, that specific family, and meet the child's needs. There is always the question, who is responsible for the child and who knows better? Is it the parents? Is it the teachers? And the school leaders should be able to understand and make the bridge the relationship between parents and teachers, that working together is the best way forward, because this is what's going to help the child have their needs met. So going towards the end of the presentation, I just wanted to share what are the factors that we need to consider in order to develop services that are good for the children. It's important to have someone coordinating everything. So who is the person coordinating the meetings between schools and professionals and parents and carers and the rest of the family? We need to have a key worker, someone who is responsible to oversee these relationships. We want parent partnership models. So we want groups of parents who work together, who support each other, because they are sharing the same journey and the same difficulties. We want everyone's views to be valued. So you need to show that you respect the parents' views, even if you disagree with them, you know, and to ensure that we hold positive and realistic views on behavior and progress. It's very it's very unlikely that the children with special educational needs are going to work at the same pace or at the same level as their peers. So we need to understand that sometimes, even if they don't achieve what the other children in the classroom achieve, what's important to focus on is the progress. If they make progress, that's what's important, and not whether they will achieve the same outcome. And of course, planning. Planning is very important. We shouldn't go in blind into the situations. We need to make good plans, assess the child's needs and difficulties, and move on. So the Department for Education in the UK has created quite a few programs that are for parents to support them through the journey of diagnosis and planning and intervention. And you can explore in China what are the services that are available. And if no services are available, maybe you guys can be the next pioneers in introducing services for parents and supporting schemes. One service that I think is very important and works in different cultures and societies is the structured conversation, which focuses on achievement for all. And the purpose of that program is to establish a relationship between the parent and the key teachers, to allow the parent the opportunity to share their concerns and also what they want for their child. You know, it's good to know what the parent wants for their child's future so we can support them. The purpose is to set clear goals and targets in the learning environment and determine which activities are going to contribute to these targets. So identifying the responsibilities for the parents, for the schools management, for the teachers, for the pupils is very important, because everybody is clear about what needs to be done, by when, and how. And also to clarify the most effective means of communication, like how do parents and teachers and professionals communicate with each other to ensure that the child gets the best support. So parents may have lower expectations, and so may teachers. They may have their personal issues and personal reasons for finding it difficult to engage with the school. We need, as educators, we need to remember that they are going through a very difficult journey, and the diagnosis of a special educational need and disability is a life-changing diagnosis for the child, but for the whole family as well. So we need to make sure that we identify the people who can stand for the child, who can defend the child's needs, who can fight for the child's needs. And we need to be there to support as teachers with the right knowledge for the child's best outcome. It's important to remember that we can never tell a parent what to do. We as educators and as professionals have the responsibility to be aware, to know the different options, to know the different interventions, to make every effort to support the child. But at the end of the day, it's the parent who makes the decisions. And what we need to do is guide the parents and help them make the right decision for their child. This brings me to the end of my session. So thank you so much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Actually, I have a question. Actually,
Of
it's
course.
very interesting and very stimulating presentation. I have a question, because when you talk about continual fear of the future, actually, I did a research, and also basically when I interviewed parents, and then they expressed that they are very worried about the futures of their children with SEN. So actually, it's very understandable, because in Hong Kong, we do not have a lot of good support, especially for those grow up after, let's say, when they pass childhood and when they grow up to, let's say, to the stage of adolescence and adulthood. I'm wondering whether any support will be given to SEN adolescents or, let's say, adults from the UK government.
Yes. So what is very interesting is that education was considered a right for children. And as you probably know, that a child is anyone under the age of 18 years old. And a few years ago, the UK government changed the Educational Needs Code of Practice, which is a code by which we offer services, and they increased the age of education to 25. So now children in the UK, children who have a diagnosis of special educational need and disability can go to school or college up to the age of 25. This from 18 to 25 is 7 years that are very important because, you know, as a parent, if your child reach 18 and they can't go to university or they can't get a job, what are you going to do? It's really stressful. So by increasing the age, that means that the children can stay in education as adults. And this is giving a bit of time to social services and parents and carers to find alternative provision. In the UK, if there are children and young people after the age of 25 who can hold a job with some support or who can have some independent skills, then there are houses where they live together and they have carers and people who support them to live there. I have an example. One of the autistic children I used to work with, and I started working with him when he was 5, and now he is 27. And he is quite severely autistic, so he doesn't have very good communication and everything. But they taught him in college to work in the kitchen of a restaurant. So he is able to cut vegetables or to serve food and things like that. Always with some support, of course, but he is able to do that. And this is quite encouraging that they can be useful. I mean, very often he wants to eat the food, you know, rather than serve it, but still it's very encouraging that they are able to do something. So yes, there is a little bit of provision, but still not a lot. And that's a big issue and a big worry, because all the parents I know are worried, okay, what will happen if I die? You know, what will happen to my child when I'm not there? Or what if I get a disease and I'm not able to care for my child? What will happen to them? And that's the biggest worry for the parents. Yeah, we're not there yet. I don't think any country is there yet. But yeah, a big issue.
Thank you, Effie. We don't have any more questions. And
Lovely.
Thank you very
you,
much
class.
for your good presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Have a lovely evening there. And thank you for listening to me. Good luck with your studies, and always believe you can make a difference. Yes, you are the future. So even if you manage to change one person's life, you will be very successful.